Good morning, everyone. I'm Lauren Peterson, the Senior Director of Relationship Management at TechPoint, and I want to welcome everyone to the second event in our three-part series on the path to equity in Indiana Tech. We are so thrilled that we have over 200 people registered for today's session on intersectionality, following a great first event last weekend on anti-racism in leadership. If you were unable to attend that last session, you can watch the recording, and we'll be sure to drop the link into the chat here in Zoom this morning. I personally walked away with some great takeaways, including the breakout sessions where we heard from your tech peers on topics like how their organizations establish and measure DE&I goals, as well as the advice they have for others on this journey. I'm looking forward to continuing the learning as we dive into the topic of intersectionality today. This series is possible thanks to a few organizations who have stepped up to support as sponsors. Thank you to Fakery Drinker, a go-to law firm for our tech community, and to Comcast Business, a partner in internet, phone, and cable for organizations large and small, for stepping up to be presenting sponsors of this series. And thank you to recently merged Ultimate Kronos Group, UKG, for being an underwriting sponsors of this particular session. Before we can make change, we must first learn about the systems we are dealing with and examine our own place of privilege or lack thereof in all of our different identities. This is why I'm excited to welcome back our facilitator for the series and the featured speaker for today's session, Demetria Miles-McDonald. Demetria is the founder and CEO of Decide Diversity, a company focused on increasing the presence and effectiveness of underrepresented groups in the workplace, specifically in leadership positions. Demetria helps expose leaders to stereotypes and biases that prevent qualified people from reaching their highest potential. And she specializes in bringing the experiences of marginalized people to the forefront to better understand and utilize the strengths they bring to the workplace. She has been instrumental in designing the series with the TechPoint team to create the most impact and offer insights and strategies each of you can take back to your own companies. So we certainly do hope that happens today. Demetria's passion for achieving equality for the marginalized, oppressed, and underrepresented is her life's work. We're thrilled to partner with her and to have her as our moderator today. Demetria, I'll go ahead and turn things over to you.
Thank you so much, Lauren, and thank you all for joining us today for part 2 in this series. I'm really excited to talk about intersectionality. It's one of the things that, last night I didn't get much sleep because I was so excited to talk with you all about this. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in and share my screen so that we can get started. And Anna, if you could give me a thumbs up and let me know you can see my screen. Perfect. All right, so let's talk about the need for intersectionality. I often like to start by looking at data of Fortune 500 organizations. And we know that diversity starts at the top. It starts at the C-level, the CEO level, really. And I like to start with Fortune 500 organizations because they have all the resources in the world. They have, all the ways to make diversity work. And their progress, they should be leading the way. And so if they can't make it happen, what hope does that give the rest of us that we can make it happen? Well, let's dive into what it says right now as far as diversity at the CEO level of Fortune 500 companies. So the first number that you see is where we are currently. And then the number in parentheses is the number that we were at 2 years ago, so in 2018. I pulled this information from the Alliance for Board Positions. So it's an organization that looks at every 2 years the composition of CEOs and Fortune 500 companies and their boards. So right now we have 37 women CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, 4 Black men CEOs, 10 Latino men, 5 LGBTQ, and of that 37 women, there are 3 women of color. If it's not listed here, so if you don't see a particular demographic that's listed, that's because 1, there either are no CEOs of that particular demographic, and then 2, it could be that they just aren't out with that particular demographic. Here's what we see with Fortune 500 board positions. So out of the 5,670 Fortune 500 board positions, here's the demographic layout. So that the raw data is the first number that you see. And then in parentheses, it's the percentage of the overall number and then the change from 2 years ago. I like to also go here because in most of our organizations, the board is really influential when it comes to how our operations operate, how our organizations operate. So I like to look at, board positions of Fortune 500 companies, and we've seen change, we've seen progress, but is it happening at a rate that we can all be satisfied and happy with? I don't think so, but progress is better than no progress, right? I'm actually going to come back to this slide, but I wanted to show it to you in the very beginning. And then when I come back to it, I hope that you can see some things and look at this a little bit differently. Most DEI strategies and initiatives focus on one identity at a time. So you may have a strategy focused on, hiring and retaining women. Really hot right now is hiring and retaining people of color, specifically Black people. So you may have a strategy on how to do that. And so each one of these groups, you could have a strategy on hiring, attracting, retaining, developing, and so on. But what happens when a person identifies with 2 or more of these particular identities? How does the strategy that your organization has created, how does it accommodate someone who fits into all of these different groups, who has multiple marginalized identities? From my experience, most organizations aren't diving in at this particular level. We're staying kind of at that surface level where you're making people choose which identity they're going to bring to the table at one time. I know in my experience, oftentimes I'm asked to either bring my identity as a Black person or as a woman to the table, and there not being room for me to bring everything. And I know I'm probably going to say this at least once about bringing your entire self to the table. But when we talk about intersectionality, that can happen. It's the way to go so that people can bring their entire selves to the table. Let me just give you a definition of intersectionality. So if you've not heard of this before, intersectionality occurs when a person identifies with 2 or more marginalized, oppressed, or underrepresented groups. And I just want to give you a little bit of background on intersectionality. This term was coined in 1989 by Kimberly Crenshaw. And let me just tell you a little bit about Kimberly Crenshaw. So leading up to 1989, there was a group of African-American women who sued a manufacturing company for racial and gender discrimination. Come to find out, this manufacturing company did not hire Black women. They hired white men to be in leadership positions. They hired white women to be administrative assistants, and they hired Black men to be machine operators, but they did not hire any Black women. And so this group of Black women who had interviewed for roles, had been turned away, went before a judge and said, you know what, we're going to sue this company for racial and gender discrimination. And the laws at the time said that you could only sue for one form of discrimination at a time. So when we're looking at this group of Black women, they could not sue for racial discrimination because this manufacturing company hired Black men. They also could not sue for gender discrimination because this company hired white women. So being at the intersection of race and gender, there was no safety net for them when it came to the legal system. And ultimately, their case was dismissed. This actually happened in our judicial system. This is an actual case that you could go and you could research. Well, Kimberly Crenshaw served on the legal team for these Black women in their case against this manufacturing company. She saw that there was this gap in how people at the intersection were being forgotten about and they were slipping through the cracks. And so she said, you know what, there may be an opportunity for us to dig a little bit deeper here and figure out in what other areas are specifically Black women at the time, where are Black women being left behind? And so Kimberly Crenshaw is still doing a whole lot of work around intersectionality. And I have some homework for you at the end of this session so that you can learn more about Kimberly Crenshaw, intersectionality, and the work that she's doing there. But she coined this term in 1989. However, we can track the concept of intersectionality all the way back to Sojourner Truth's time. So you may be familiar with Sojourner Truth as an anti-slavery abolitionist. And she also gave the Ain't I a Woman speech at the Women's Convention in Akron, Ohio in the early 1800s. If you've not had an opportunity to read or to hear the Ain't I a Woman speech, I highly encourage you after this session to do that. It reminds me of a time I was in college. I went to the University of Louisville. I was in college and I took a theater class, and we had to recite a particular speech, and I chose to do this one. And at the time I knew nothing about intersectionality, and it's so amazing how when I look back over my career and my life and the things that I've done and the avenues that I've chosen to go down, it all ties together. Because who knew when I was 18 that Sojourner Truth would be a major part of the work that I do. So if you haven't read that speech or listened to it recently or through the eyes or lens of intersectionality, please do that. But one of the things that really stands out is Sojourner Truth says, I can do all the same things that a Black man can do. I can do, most of the things that white women can do. But no one's treating me like white women. No one's treating me like a Black man. So where am I in this equation? Ain't I a woman too? That's basically what Sojourner Truth is saying. And it's so powerful to read that through the lens of intersectionality. So that's going to be part of your homework too. Early research into intersectionality said that if we combine the experiences of an African-American man with the experiences of a white woman, then we would understand the experiences of an African-American woman. I'm going to say that again. If we combine the experiences of an African-American man with the experiences of a white woman, boom, that's how we describe the experiences of Black women. Now, I don't know about you all, but that's wrong. That is just not how we can talk about the experiences of Black women or anyone at the intersection. So recent developments have said that instead of looking at intersectionality like math, where 1 + 1 = 2, we should really be looking at it more like chemistry. So I know I have a lot of people from the tech industry joining us today, but I'm just curious, did anyone major in chemistry in college? Just put in the chat if you did, or if you know someone who did, or just raise your hand. So I majored in chemistry for 2.5 years in college, and it was horrible. I knew nothing about chemistry. I didn't even like chemistry. But again, if I look at all the things that I went through in my life and in my career, it was purposeful because it got me to this point. So while it did not work out for me, I ended up changing my major at the insistence of my mom, who was like, okay, Demetria, either you change your major or you're going to fail out of school. So this is very serious. I need you to get it together. No worries. I graduated from college, went on to get a master's degree, so we're good to go there. But I remember learning in high school chemistry and even in my college chemistry classes, some of the basic elements of chemistry and why they're important. So we learned about oxygen and why oxygen is important. Then we went on to learn about hydrogen and why that's important. Don't ask me more than that about either of these elements, because honestly, that's about all I can remember. But the point that I am trying to make to you all is that it's really important for us to learn about these individual elements, how we as people use these elements, why it's important for the ecosystem, the universe, and so on. But we didn't stop there. We also learned about compounds and how these unique elements come together to create a brand new experience, or a brand new element or compound, like H2O. H2O is just as important for our survival as hydrogen and oxygen. So why don't we think about diversity the same way? It's really important for us to understand the individual elements. It's important for us to understand the experiences of someone who identifies as a woman, who identifies as, Asian American, or identifies as a person with a physical disability. But what happens to that person's experience when they identify with multiple marginalized identities? We know that it's not an additive experience. We can't just layer one thing on top of another. But what does that new experience look like? And as leaders within our organization, we have to start diving a little bit deeper so that we can understand these things. So I created a table of diversity, which should have been sent to you all via email prior to today's session. So Anna, could you also drop that in the chat? So if you can't find your email or need to pull it up quickly, it's going to be in the chat for you to do that, because we're going to do an activity with it. But this is a great way for us to recognize those individual elements, but also to remember that we are all intersectional. We all identify with all of these things at the same time. And we bring these identities with us everywhere we go. We don't just show up as one or the other. We show up as all of them. All right, Anna, did you get that in there? If you could just give me a thumbs up. Perfect. All right, so open the table of diversity. So either from your email or from the chat section. Make sure you keep this screen up as well. I'm going to give you the instructions for the activity that we're going to do. It's really important for you first to understand your own intersectional identity before you can start incorporating intersectionality into the way that you do work. So I want you to write down and go through each of the columns on the table of diversity. So each of the columns represent a different aspect of our identity. So the first column is race, the second column is gender identity, the third column is sexual orientation, and so on. So go through each one of those columns and write down the element that best describes you. If there's more than one element in a column that best describe you, then write down all that apply. If none of the elements describe you, then at the bottom of each column, there's an element that starts with O, and that stands for other. So for instance, in the first column, the very bottom is OR, that stands for other race. So you can either write that one down or you can create your own element. The idea here is for us to understand our intersectional identity and then give permission for other people to bring their intersectional identities to the table with us. So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to go through each of the columns on the table of diversity and write down the elements that best describe you. Now, in our virtual world, 30 seconds is going to seem like a really long time. Anna, I don't know if you have some music. Ordinarily I'd say could we play some maybe Jeopardy music, but that's so sad to think about Jeopardy right now with the passing of Alex Trebek. So I don't know, does Wheel of Fortune have music that we could play? I'm not quite sure, but take about 20 more seconds to go through each of the columns on the table of diversity and write down the element that best describes you. All right, give you about 10 more seconds. And if you don't get through all of the columns, that's okay. But one of the things that I'm going to ask that you do is take this back to your organization and have everyone specifically on your leadership team go through this exercise to better understand your intersectional identity. Now, I can't ask you all to go through this activity and not do it myself. So I'm going to share with you my intersectional identity, or what I like to call my diversity formula. It's not required that you share it. If there are parts of your identity that you feel you don't feel comfortable sharing, that's okay too. I completely understand. I was just talking with a group the other day, and the leader was saying how they have these diversity conversations, but people don't speak up. And I said, It's just recently that we've decided that it's okay to talk about these particular things at work. If you remember, I don't even know if it was a decade ago, it wasn't customary to talk about race or to talk about gender identity or sexual orientation, or religion. Those things just weren't talked about openly and freely at work. And so to get people to shift their mindset to start having these conversations, it's going to be a hurdle. So I completely understand if there are parts of your identity that you don't feel comfortable bringing to the table. But know that the long-term goal of the work that we do is so that people can feel comfortable. All right, so here's my diversity formula. I am a Black woman living in the suburbs, part of Generation Y, married, middle class, Christian, have a master's degree. And the great thing about our diversity formula is that it changes. Where you are today is not necessarily where you're going to be 6 months, or in my case, 9 months from now. So a couple of months ago, I had a little baby boy who's currently napping, and fingers crossed that he's napping for the entire time that we're together this morning. But my diversity formula, my intersectional identity changed drastically with the birth of my first kid. Those life changes change how I show up to work. It changes how other people interact with me, and it changes who I am when I'm sitting at the table. I want you to look at what you wrote down and compare it to the table of diversity. In each column, there's an element that's in bold. So in the first column, it's WH for white. In the second column, it's MA for male. The third column is SA for straight, and so on. Did you write down any elements that are in bold? Chances are you did. If you were to combine all of these bold elements into one person, it's what we call the mythical norm. The mythical norm is who we are all compared to. It's the most privileged person in Western society. It's mythical because this person doesn't exist. Believe me, I have tried to find this person, and the closest that I've ever gotten was Mark Zuckerberg. He fits a lot of these privileged characteristics and traits, but even he doesn't fit all of them. It's the norm because I said earlier, this is who we are all compared to. So when we're talking about who's privileged and who's not, this is it. This is the standard. What's really interesting is that the further you are away from the mythical norm, the less we can rely on stereotypes to describe your experience. Now, I know no one wants to admit that, we're biased and that we rely on stereotypes when we interact with people, but that's the reality of it. That's what happens. However, once you start identifying all the ways that you are intersectional, those stereotypes just don't make sense. They don't add up. They don't really describe anyone's experience. And so we have to figure out a new way to interact with people, to better understand the experiences that they bring to the table, the strengths that they bring, and the uniqueness of why they are in our organizations and what they can do to help us solve our problems. What's really interesting, when I do this particular activity, and I've done this with thousands of people, both in the United States, I've even had the table of diversity translated into a couple of other languages and other cultures, and we've done this activity. And I've not found two people who have the exact same diversity formula. We are all different. That's a fact. No one is exactly the same. I've not done this activity with identical twins, so don't hold me to that just yet. That statement could change. But one of the things that's really interesting is that once we realize that we're all different, the question is no longer, are you diverse? It's how diverse are you? And what does that mean for how you bring yourself to work and how you show up everywhere? How do you show up in your community? How do you show up in school or in your church? All of these things are really important. There's a couple of things that I want you to remember when you're thinking about intersectionality from an individual perspective. And I've said this a couple of times already. We bring all of our identities to the table at the same time. One of the things I hear a lot is if you are a woman of color, then you have 2 strikes against you. because you're a woman and you're a person of color. And I can tell you, as someone, being in the shoes as a woman of color, that's not how it feels to me. It doesn't feel like a double strike or two strikes against me, because I don't know what one strike feels like. I don't know what that one strike of being a woman. So I say strike because to me, I love being a woman. It's so empowering, but I don't know what that feels like. I bring all of me to the table at once. I don't know about you all, but I've become like the Black Martha Stewart lately. I keep saying that to everyone, where I like to clean and organize, and I'm thinking about all the ways that I'm going to create a garden and all of that. But recently, I made a chocolate pecan bourbon pie. It was delicious. I'm happy to share the recipe if anyone would like it. But I was thinking about all the different ingredients that you have to put together to make this pie. And it would have been horrible if I just threw all the ingredients in a bowl, didn't mix it up, just layered one on top of another and stuck it in the oven and expected to come out with a masterpiece. Yes, I did have a masterpiece. Let me just say that. It was amazing. But the point is, you have to mix all of these ingredients together. And then when you put it in the oven, you get the pie or the cake or whatever it is that you're fixing. That's how it is when we talk about our intersectional identities. They're all mixed up inside of us. They're not layered one on top of another. It truly creates a blended, unique experience. No one identity cancels out another. So growing up, my parents used to have these conversations with me about making sure I got a high level of education. So, master's degree, PhD, or so on. Making sure that I got a really good job, making a whole lot of money, and with the hopes of all of these things shielding me from the isms, sexism, racism, things like that. And what we're finding in our research is that that's not really how it works. You can't be privileged in one area and expect that to shield you from the isms of another area. It's not bad to, go and get the highest level of education or to have a really great job, but you still will experience, those isms. I'm gonna give you an example. There was an article that came out a couple of years ago where Oprah Winfrey was out shopping and she went to a boutique. It was a small boutique, one of a kind. And she goes into this boutique, it's in another country, and she's looking around, trying to figure out what she's gonna buy. She doesn't have like her team with her entourage. So it's really just her. She goes in and the sales associate comes up to her and says, hi, thanks for stopping by. However, I don't know that you can afford to buy the products that we sell. There's another boutique down the street that might be a little bit more reasonable for you. This really happened. We're talking about Oprah Winfrey, a billionaire. Oprah Winfrey could buy everything in that boutique. She could buy the boutique. But that didn't shield her from the racism, sexism, whatever that she experienced in that moment. With everything that's happening from a racial standpoint in this country, there's been a lot of conversation of, well, if you just did this or if you just did that, you would be protected. You wouldn't have to worry about facing an untimely death or being mistreated. And unfortunately, that's just not what the research says. The research does not show that if you follow the rules or if you dress a certain way or talk a certain way, that you will be protected from all the other ways that you could experience discrimination. There was an article that was published to report on some research that was done, and it looked at the trajectory of 3 different groups. The first group was a group of white teenage boys who lived in a very affluent neighborhood. The second group was a group of Black teenage boys who also lived in the same affluent neighborhood. And the third group was a group of Black teenage boys who lived in a more poverty-stricken neighborhood. And it looked at what happened to these boys as they went through high school, graduated from high school. Did they go to college? Did they get a good job? What happened to them? And what they found was that the only difference that made a difference for these particular individuals was race. the two groups of African American boys, regardless of the neighborhood that they lived in, regardless of the school that they went to and the education that they attained, the chances of them going to prison or not going to college were the same. Whereas the trajectory of the white students, the white boys who grew up in the affluent neighborhood was much better. What we found is that when we're talking about diversity, you have to talk about race. That has to be a part of every single conversation. It doesn't have to be the only part of the conversation. You can also talk about race and gender identity, race and sexual orientation, race and education or socioeconomic status. Talk about all of those things, but you have to talk about race because it is one of the determinants of success in our country, and believe it or not, within most of our organizations. I love talking about the intersectional oppression that occurs within identities. And there's been a lot more conversation about this lately, and I'll get to that in a second. So, as a woman, we are judged on so many different things. Men are too, absolutely. But when we talk about intersectionality, the question is, who is disproportionately being impacted by this particular topic? So when we think about, what we look like, when we think about body image, there are 5 different body types for women: triangle, apple, hourglass, round, rectangle. And in it, there's levels of privilege and oppression in each one of these. Hourglass is the most coveted body shape. But even within that, there's questions of, well, did you work out or did you have some surgery to get your hourglass shape? So there's all these different levels of privilege and oppression that occur within identities. The brown paper bag test. Put a yes in the comment section if you've ever heard of the brown paper bag test. So this is something that originated in slavery. The brown paper bag test, if you were enslaved and you were darker than the brown paper bag, then you had to work in the field. If you were lighter than the brown paper bag, you had the privilege of working in the house. So everyone of African descent was enslaved. But this brown paper bag test created such division between people that it still exists today. We don't call it the brown paper bag test, we call it colorism, where if you are darker than the brown paper bag, the chances of you being successful in the world, at work, whatever the case may be, it's slim. It's slimmer than if you were lighter than the brown paper bag. I want you to do this. I want you to look at popular media. Go look at music, look at the news, look at TV shows, movies, all of that. And I want you to look at the people of color, particularly Black people. And I want you to take note. Are they lighter than the brown paper bag or are they darker than the brown paper bag? Because chances are what you're going to find is that the most successful people are lighter than the brown paper bag. So again, the brown paper bag test in and of itself doesn't necessarily exist today, but we call it colorism. We refer to it as colorism. It's evolved. Like most things in our society, this has evolved. Hair texture. Who knew that there were so many different types of hair texture? You have up in the top left corner, 2A, which is wavy hair. I call that red carpet hair. All the way down to the bottom right-hand corner, 4C, the kinky coily hair. Now, I'm not sure if you can tell today, I'm wearing my hair naturally, so I would be, in this bottom row of kinky coily hair. And I remember, I haven't always worn my hair like this. It was definitely a journey to get here. And I remember when I first started wearing my hair in the way God gave it to me, and I went to work, and my leader, said to me, wow, I really like your hair, but are you going to see clients like that today? And I was like, what? Of course I'm going to see clients. And it dawned on me that she was talking about my hair being deemed unprofessional. And I said, yes, I'm going to see clients because my brain is still the same. I still know everything today that I knew yesterday. My hair may be different, but that's about it. And so there's the Crown Act, CROWN, Crown Act. And this is going on in a lot of different states where it is becoming illegal to discriminate against people for wearing their hair in its natural state. And it's mostly targeted towards African-American men and women. but more so women, because women are more likely to wear our hair in the natural curly, kinky state, or to wear dreadlocks or things like that. So be on the lookout for that, because I think it's going to happen nationwide, state by state. I know I'm here in Kentucky, and that's something that our legislators are bringing before the House to get passed. So definitely be on the lookout for that. But it's more people are starting to say and realize I need to be me. In order for me to be the best that I can be for you, you have to let me be me. And this is one of the ways that can happen. Now, if we were to just have a conversation about women and our hair, this might not come up. Me talking about my naturally curly, kinky hair may not be a part of the normal conversation. I recall one time I went and was with a women's ERG, Employee Resource Group. And they had about 200 plus women in the Employee Resource Group. It was a really, really large organization, but it was mostly white women. There were 3 chairs of the Employee Resource Group. They were all white women, and they set the agenda for what was going to be discussed, what was going to be talked about. And for the 3 years that the Employee Resource Group was in effect, not once had they talked about a subject that was particular to Black women or to any women of color. It was all, and this was very unintentional. They did not wake up and say, okay, we're only going to talk about white women issues today. That's not what they said. However, they just weren't exposed to knowing that we also need to think about and talk about issues that are very particular to women of color, or to women of a particular sexual orientation. That just never came up in conversation. And of course, after we talked about intersectionality, they recognized that they needed to perhaps get different leaders to set the agenda so that this could be a part of regular conversation. So how do you do that? How do you view and solve through an intersectional lens? And I want to spend really the next 10 minutes or so talking about that with you, and then getting you set up to have this conversation within your breakout rooms. So there's a couple of questions that I ask when I'm working with an organization, really trying to get that mindset shift to think about intersectionality and make it the lens that you filter everything through. So the question is, who is being disproportionately affected by this process, program, or initiative? And I want you to look at the data, and I'm going to show you an example of how you can do that. But also look at some anecdotal evidence. Ask people about their experiences. I know for myself, I have a ton of examples of ways that I feel like I've been told to tone down, to not bring my entire self to work, to not talk about my kinky coily hair or the experiences of colorism, or whatever the case may be. And I can tell you, being a new mom, I have so many more experiences of how being an intersectional person has been these past couple of months. I'll share my email address. Let's connect on that offline, because I have a ton of stories to share. But who needs to be at the table to help us understand this perspective of those who are disproportionately impacted? So with the example of the ERGs that I just told you about, they realized we don't have good representation right now, and we need to make sure that the people who are making decisions for the group is diverse. Just because we're all women doesn't mean that we have a diverse group of women at the table. Just because we're all people of color doesn't mean that we have a diverse group at the table. It requires digging a little bit deeper. And then what is the solution? And is it intersectional? Let me go through a couple of examples. Pay inequality. We talk about pay inequality as something that really affects every single industry, every single organization, and it is one of the best examples of intersectionality and really how to think about it. So pay inequality says for every dollar a white man makes, women make 82 cents. How do we solve this? So typically what would happen is we would say, okay, if women are making 80 some odd cents for every dollar that a white man makes, that's the average. How do we get that number up? How do we close the gap between men and women overall? That's been the topic of conversation. That's what we've been focusing on. But what we haven't noticed is that while we're getting that overall number up, we're not really focused on helping those that are disproportionately impacted by this. We might not even know that there are people who are disproportionately impacted by this. Did you know that women of color, that 83 cents for every dollar that a white man makes, it's much worse for women of color, much worse. So for Black women, it's 63 cents. For Native American women, it's 57 cents. For Latina women, it's 54 cents. So equal pay day, that's the number of months into the new year women must work to make the same amount of money a white man made in the previous 12 months. For women on average, that's 16 months. For white women, that's 16 months compared to 12 months. For Black women, it's 20 months. Native American women, 21 months. And Latino women, it's 23 months. Now, I've been tracking this year over year because I want to know, are we making significant progress for everyone? Now, the gap between men and women has been closing. That's great. We can celebrate that. But when you look at the gap between men, white women, and women of color, the story is not the same. So last year, Black women recognized Equal Pay Day in July. So we were starting to close that gap. And year over year, we have been closing that gap, but now it's getting worse. The gap is widening again specifically for Black women. For Native American women and Latino women, those numbers have been the same year over year for at least the past 5 years. There's been no change there. So while we're seeing progress specifically for white women, the same cannot be said for women of color. But what we hope is that any solution that we apply to women on average, specifically white women, trickles down and positively impacts every other woman, specifically women of color. And that's just not how it happens. Instead, we need to ask, who is being disproportionately impacted by pay inequality? And who needs to be at the table to help us solve this? What we really need to do is start with Latino women and say, what is it that Latino women need in order to make the same amount of money that a white man makes? Apply the solutions there, and then what we see is that it trickles up. And I know that we've really kind of taken this term and this phrase from the tech industry, but what we do is we do universal design, where we're creating one solution that truly works for everyone by focusing on those that are most marginalized. Now, I know you all probably know this, but I like to bring it up. When we think about the pinch and zoom features on our smart devices, so our cell phones and tablets and even computers and TVs now, that particular technology is absolutely necessary for people who have visual impairments. If you have a visual impairment, you absolutely need to be able to make things bigger and smaller on your screen. But we all use that technology. That is something that has been beneficial for everyone. And that's how we also need to think about our solutions for equality when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have to figure out who is disproportionately impacted. What's the root cause of this particular issue? Who is it impacting the most? And then start there. And then if the solution is intersectional, then we can see that that solution positively impacts everyone else involved. Let me give you another example. So Gap, they are the parent company for Banana Republic, Gap, and a couple of other name brand stores. They had a problem. They have a undergarments line. And if you know anything about undergarments, if you've ever gone shopping for undergarments, specifically for something in the color nude, you know that that nude may not be the nude for you. And Gap recognized this, specifically Banana Republic. They recognized that nude doesn't work for everyone. As a matter of fact, does nude work for anyone? That's the question. I know it doesn't work for everyone, but does it work for anyone? So they did some research to figure out that, maybe we need to expand our line of nude undergarments to make it work for more people. And that's what they did. They got a group together that was outside of their diversity and inclusion department, that was outside of the employee resource groups. Really what they did is they got a cross-functional team together of people from various departments, different levels throughout the organization, different backgrounds, and said, okay, Here's the problem that we're going to solve. Bring your perspective to the table, bring every bit of you to the table, and help us figure out how to solve this. They looked at data. They looked at anecdotal evidence. So they asked people, what's been your experience with nude products? And what do you hope to see? And this is what they found. They ended up creating the True Hues line, which is a line of expanded nude products. And they saw a 21% sales increase year over year. Because here's what we know. When we find a product that works for us, specifically for, it feels like it was made specifically for you, you are going to not only buy it, but you're going to tell your friends about it. I remember, I think it was last year, Band-Aid came out with Band-Aid colors that truly matched people of color skin tone. So think about it. Band-Aid for the longest had that one shade of nude, and then they had, you know, all the cartoon type Band-Aids. But it wasn't until last year that they actually started making Band-Aids that match my skin tone. And for most people, that may not seem like a big deal, but it is a pain walking around with Band-Aids that stick out like a sore thumb. So now having a Band-Aid that matched my skin tone, that's a big deal for me. It truly felt like someone was listening to me, was understanding my particular issue. And so we have to continue to drill down deeper to better understand who's being impacted and what are the solutions that we need to bring forth. So I bring us back to this particular slide that we looked at in the very beginning. When we looked at the Fortune 500 board positions. Now, these numbers probably didn't pop out to you before, and I didn't draw attention to them. But I want you to look at being at the intersection of race and gender. So for women of color, representation at the board level is pitiful. It really is. 45 Latina women. And I mean, there's over 5,000 board positions, and only 45 of them are occupied by Latina women. First of all, from a representation standpoint, that's just not good at all. But also, what issues are we missing out on? What perspectives are we missing out on? We saw that in the previous slide with pay inequality, Latina women are faring the worst. And so how can we solve the problem when there are no Latina women at the table? So I want you to think about, just right now, I want you to think about for the next 30 seconds or so, COVID-19. You know, it's consumed our lives. I mean, you know, ordinarily I'd say we'd probably be doing this in person, but for COVID-19, we're having to do this and many other things, either working from home or virtually. So who is being disproportionately impacted by COVID-19? You know, off the top of my head, I can think about people of color are being disproportionately impacted. I think about working from home. You know, if you have small kids, then you're being disproportionately impacted. There was a study that came out that said that women's progress when it comes to equal rights in the workplace, we've gone back decades and decades because of COVID-19. More women are leaving the workforce and having to be at-home parents, so stay-at-home moms, because of COVID-19, because being able to balance working from home, you know, kids having to do school from home. And if you don't have kids who are of school age, daycares and things being closed, I mean, it's a full-time job. Having to balance all of that is really difficult. But if we were to be very specific and dig a little bit deeper, what would the data tell us? Okay, if people of color are being impacted, Black and brown people are being disproportionately affected by COVID-19, could we also dig deeper to find out from a socioeconomic status? Black and brown people of a particular socioeconomic status, a particular gender, sexual orientation, familiar status, go through the table of diversity and look at each one of those columns. What does their experience like with COVID-19? But who needs to be at the table to help us better understand this? I could speculate and look at data all day long, but if I don't have the right people at the table to provide me with their particular experience, it's probably not going to move me very much. And then also, I'm not going to be able to find a solution that's intersectional. When we talk about solving for, you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, it is both a matter of the brain. So we're thinking about numbers, we're thinking about systems and things of that nature, but it's also a matter of the heart. we have to think about, there's actual people at the center of these particular issues. It's not just a hypothetical. These people are being impacted by this day in and day out. So I just want you to think about, things like COVID-19 and pay inequality, leadership development within your organization, hiring practices, all of these different things. So far, we've only scratched the surface. We've not dug deep enough to better understand the experiences of people at the intersection. So in your breakout session, I want you to think about building an inclusive tech culture. Here, and these questions are going to be in the chat of your breakout session, and we are actually going to assign you rooms, so you don't have to worry about closing this and going, none of that. We are going to place you in a room with a facilitator so that you can discuss these things. But I want you to think about who is being disproportionately excluded from or is negatively experiencing the tech industry. Think about your particular organization. Who is not having a great experience? I want you to be very specific and dig deeper. Then I want you to think about who needs to be at the table to help us better understand the perspective of those who are disproportionately impacted. And then if you have some solutions that you'd like to toss around, really question, are they intersectional? Are you starting with those who are most marginalized instead of starting with those who are the most privileged of that group? Now, realistically, you're not going to get through all these questions. You're probably just going to get through that first question because it's a big one. That's a loaded question. Who is being disproportionately excluded from or negatively experiencing the tech industry? That's a big question. And so if you only get to that one, that's completely fine. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can give you some instructions to move forward. So we're going to send you into these breakout rooms for some group discussions. Again, those questions that I pose to you in the scenario is going to be in your breakout room, so you can refer to those there. There's going to be a TechPoint team member in each room taking notes so that we can share any great takeaways that you have. And after about 15 minutes or so, we're going to bring you back into this main room to wrap up. So we're going to release you to your rooms now for you to have these conversations. Welcome back, everyone. Thanks so much for joining our conversation. I don't know about you all, but these breakout sessions always go by way too fast, and there's a lot of great conversations that were happening. I joined a breakout session, and we were talking about the veteran population because today's Veterans Day. It completely slipped my mind. So, having someone at the table to talk about veteran issues and digging in deeper to really understand what are some of the challenges veterans have in the tech industry would be a great place to start, as we think about what actions we're going to take today. So what organizations can you invite to the table to help you to begin to understand the veterans experience, and then start to drill down even deeper than that? Veterans of color, women veterans, veterans with mental and physical disabilities. So there's so many different intersectional avenues that you can explore when it comes to how to be more inclusive of the veteran population. I don't know about you all, but I love coming to these sessions and connecting with people, and of course learning. And we are not done. We have another session next week to wrap up this 3-part series. And let me tell you, if you've enjoyed the first one, if you enjoyed today, be sure to tell a friend about the one next week, because we are ending on a high note. So next week, we are going to be hearing from James LaDuca. James is the Senior Director of Global Inclusion and Diversity at Twitter, about the impact of DEI work. And we'll focus on some action steps that you can take in the next 5 minutes, 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 months, and so on. So if you haven't already, sign up by visiting the registration link that we'll be dropping in the chat, and we're going to see you next week. We're also going to share some resources from today. We've been compiling all the information that we had in the chat, that we'll be sharing that after today's session, along with a replay link for today. Thank you all so much for joining us. We're going to see you again next week, and have a great day, everyone. Thank you.